All right, guys, happy Monday. We're going to talk about one of my favorite kinds of things to photograph, and that is the micro landscape. So I'm going to go ahead. I want you guys to follow along with me here. We're going to talk about the micro landscape. Then we're going to give you some details on how to find the micro landscape. We're going to make some observations on micro landscapes, and then you guys are going to go out and you're going to take some micro landscapes. Okay, here we go. Learning goal. Learn to identify and apply elements of photography aesthetics. So that is what photography aesthetics is, what makes a photograph attractive, what makes a photograph pretty. You guys have been doing some really great stuff. Sometimes that's editing. Typically it's color, texture, form, balance, things like that. That's what makes a photograph attractive. How you use the camera, you guys have been doing a great job with that, but I want you to continue to identify and apply elements of photography aesthetics. In this case, learn to compose a landscape photograph. Now, we are not doing a big landscape photograph. We're doing a small landscape photograph. So here we go. Success criteria. Student can independently, of course you're going to be independent because you're at home by yourselves, complete a set of photos that demonstrates their level of mastery of composition and knowledge of landscape photograph. So you're showing me your mastery. I'm checking your level of proficiency. How good are you at showing the idea, which is micro landscapes, and how good are you at applying photo aesthetics to that picture? Okay, so those are the two things I'm looking at. If you're just proficient, that's okay, that's a B. If you're advanced, that's an A. Please be better than proficient or proficient or better. Okay, don't be less than proficient. Okay, to-dos, tasks that we're gonna have in class today. You're gonna study and make observations of what makes a good landscape photo. So we're not going to look at landscape photos today. That's coming. We're actually going to shoot little landscapes today. Later on, we're going to shoot really, really big landscapes as panoramas, and then we're going to shoot traditional landscapes. So got a couple different kinds that we're going to be doing. What are 5 aesthetic elements that appeal to you in the landscape photograph? In a little editing there, landscape photograph. You're going to get a chance to answer that question in the Google Classroom. What? Oh my goodness, guys. My keyboard is not working. I'm going to blame my keyboard. I'm sure I was just typing too fast, but it wasn't working. What is the difference between a landscape and micro landscape? So we're going to look at micro landscapes, and you're going to answer that question in the Google chat room. Look for the small details and ignore the big picture. That is one of the biggest things or biggest differences between the landscape and the micro landscape. The micro landscape, you want to look on the ground, you want to look in that small space and try to see what little details exist in nature versus how do I capture the whole space is the goal, right? So keep that in mind. But you still want to utilize things like depth of field, you still want to utilize things like horizon line, and you want to compose it like a landscape. You're just looking at the little details in nature. Leaves, plants, moss, flowers, rocks, pebbles, things like that, okay? So again, look for the small details in a landscape, ignore the big picture. For example, a leaf versus a tree, okay? They're both got texture. They both have natural earth tones in them. They both are going to utilize light and the tones of those leaves. However, the textures of a leaf and the images of a leaf can be a lot more interesting and a lot more engaging than an entire tree. So you're focusing on those small parts of nature or of a landscape. A tuft of grass, so a little tiny hill of grass or maybe a tuft of moss versus a hill, photographing a large hill. Some pebbles, some little rocks or pebbles on the ground composed in an interesting space, maybe by some water, versus a field of large rocks. So we're looking for the small pieces versus the big pieces. And the idea, again, for the micro landscape is to look for the little details in the environment versus the environment. Capture the little things, compose the little shot. Believe it or not, it's a lot easier to do that than it is an entire landscape. Okay? That's why we're doing it first. What photography elements or art elements should you focus on in your landscape photos? That's going to be leading lines. Definitely use the leading lines. Use texture, identify and represent texture well. Utilize natural colors, right, earth tones. Utilize the rule of thirds. Nature shapes, things like leaves, grass blades, flat objects like that. Focus on horizon lines and using a narrow depth of field. Those are some things that are really going to help you capture a good micro landscape. Okay, we're going to make observations of micro landscapes and take notes. So here we go. Before we do that, take a look at this list here. You're probably going to have a question about this list in the Google chat room. Create depth. These are what makes a good landscape. And then we'll draw a line and some mountains. Like a little tree action here. Trees. Oh, we frame that mountain with those trees. Get a little stream. What makes a good landscape? Creating depth. Have things in the foreground. That would be here. Foreground, hello. Have things in the middle ground, me. Have things in the background. Really fill that space up and create depth. Use a wide angle lens. Now that is for landscapes, big landscapes. You want to encompass everything by using a wide angle lens, which makes objects look further away. Not the best thing for the micro landscape. You're going to zoom in, or if you have a macro lens, it's perfect for what you're doing. Use photographic filters. So oftentimes, guys, we use filters on our lenses to cut down the glare of things. UV filters. Try to create more contrast in clouds and water. Not an option on your phone, but some of you guys might actually have filters for your phones that are going to work for this. You will be able to create photo filters in post-production. Capture movement, water. Photograph rolling water or moving grass blades. That just creates a nice element of flow. No water, pun intended. But if you capture grass tufts shaking a little bit and there's something solid behind it that's not moving, that could be a really attractive example of the movements in nature. Use water as a mirror. Anytime you get a chance to find a reflection. Now, you might use a mountain and the reflection of it in water, so you have a reflection of the mountain in water. But in a micro landscape, think about a puddle. What kind of reflections can you get in a puddle? Do you see clouds in the puddle and you're just photographing the puddle? That is a micro landscape. Take into account of people. Now, if you're going to get real close to an object out on the ground and in the background there's a playground or in the background there's people, let them move or let cars move. Let things get out of the way before you take the picture. Your dog's foot. Get your dog out of the way. Photograph when there's nothing else in the background. Let's see here. Compose in thirds. Absolutely. Maybe the sky area is 1/3 and the ground is 2/3. Maybe your little micro object, your tuft of moss or your rock is 2/3 in the corner, and then you have a little 1/3 sky, or maybe it's 1/3 in the corner and 2/3 ground and sky. Think about how you use your rule of thirds. Location, location, location. Super important in real landscapes, big landscapes. Still important in micro landscapes, but there's lots of little natural details for you to find in your backyard that work well for a micro landscape. Be outside. It's not out in here. Go outside. Now, if you have a garden or terrarium, that would work. Be patient. Take your time and make observations. Look for the best picture to take. Don't be lazy. Take your time. Look for the right picture. Don't rush through this. Use the best light. So typically that would be photographing right at sunrise or right at sunset or just before or just after. Not a possibility right now, so just make sure you don't have super bright, intense sunlight on your objects. Carry a tripod. That's great for landscapes, not so much for micro landscapes. Sometimes I'll carry a tripod so I can get really, really close to things and not have my camera shake, but that's if I'm using a real camera and not my cell phone. Maximize the depth of field. So either make everything in focus or minimize the depth of field for micro landscapes. So if I photograph this bottle here, whatever's right behind it's blurry and whatever right in front of it's blurry, and that's going to help that micro landscape look more convincing and more engaging. Think about the composition. Yeah, we talked about that, Mr. Riggins. Come on, compose rule of thirds. Find and use natural textures. If you have like a sliced log, capture the rings, capture the bark, capture that log going back in space, capture leaves, veins on leaves, textures on leaves, flower, petals, things like that. And lastly, this guy right here, get out of here. This thing is in the way. Yeah, that's annoying. Find and use earth tones and natural colors. So make sure you have natural colors in your picture and it will help communicate landscape. Okay, micro landscape. So Observations. We have got a narrow depth of field because there's nothing behind this. This is just shapes. So you have the shape of the leaf here, and you have wood shapes back here. Heavy on texture. We got lots of texture in the wood and lots of texture in the leaf here. Okay, so this one's very, very heavy on the texture here. We also have all these yellow colors, and we have these wood colors. Those kinds of things there help communicate landscape. These are also natural objects. Wood, leaf, tree, those are all landscape materials. I would consider this a micro landscape. Even though it's not landscape in the sense of looking back through the depth and field, you're still using elements of nature to capture a photo. Okay, so this is great. Just photographing those little tiny details in your backyard and ignoring everything else. My front yard, guys, is hideous. It's super ugly, but I've got an interesting tree in the front. I could take some leaves off of that. I've got some interesting bark or knots on that tree, and I can really focus into those small parts of my front yard to make this an attractive photo. Okay. Right here, water droplets. Now, you can photograph water droplets. Those make great micro photos. So if you're like, I want to add something into this photo, it's kind of boring, and you want to get back out your water droplet making tools from earlier in the year, great, do that. I love this little water droplet right here. Look at this narrow, narrow, narrow depth of field. This is in focus, this is in focus, and the water droplet's in focus, and everything else is blurry. We call that a narrow depth of field. It means just a small section is in focus. Everything in front, everything behind is blurry. We also have that natural green color back here. The purple is not typically a color we associate with nature, but it is common in flowers. So that green really does help communicate landscape. Okay, little details. Flowers and bugs all communicate micro landscape very, very well. We know it's micro because we're zoomed in on this gross little bug right here. Notice these nice earth tones and greens in the back. I think this picture could use more contrast, but that's just my personal preference. I do like, however, we have green here and a very similar green here, and that helps create balance in our picture, balance between these two sides, right? It's always a good thing to have a little bit of this color, a little bit of this color throughout the piece. So if there was blue in here, I would be upset if there's just blue right here. You'd want a little bit of blue here, maybe a little touch of blue here. That's why it's always nice with photographing water, because there's typically water in the sky. Think about how do you do that on a small scale. Oh, more bugs. Again, natural colors. We got loads of natural colors. We've got this interesting rule of thirds here. This is almost in half, almost. I'm glad they didn't make it connect to the corners here and here. That's off and just tilted a little bit. Photographing bugs is definitely going to be a micro landscape because bugs are small. You're making it big. It's a micro landscape. Good luck capturing images of bugs with your cell phone, though. It's really hard, so good luck if that's what you choose to do. Then spray it with water and make a bug wet. Now this one here is all about texture, right? We've got veiny leaf texture, we've got frost texture, we have dirt texture, we have grass texture. But in addition to that, the whole image becomes ground texture. What is that texture of the ground? It's heavy on lines, it's heavy on shapes, and it's heavy on texture. Those are the elements that this one focuses on. And notice, there could be a road just right up here and we don't even know. We're just focused on these small pieces of nature. I don't know what this is. Like a little seed or something. That's kind of interesting. So I think I personally would like this picture a little bit lower down. If we got lower to the ground and photographed this way so we'd see some edges underneath these. However, it's fun to see just ground texture. More bugs. I wonder if they put water in their mouth and all over this bug, or if it's just raining. You could capture this with a cell phone. I bet it'd be possible. Some of you guys are pretty darn creative. Okay, color. Notice color is a big one here. All earth tones. Look at, oh, by the way, this little touch of green right there. That's kind of fun. Okay. Texture, 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 texture. Natural objects. Love this one here. This is something many of you could capture. But can you have good contrast? You got those darks next to lights. Can you get good texture? Can you get good little sharpness in your image? Interesting that's blurry on the corners here. I wonder if that was because of the photo, the way it was taken, or if that's post-processing. I'm not a fan of the blurriness. I just like this nice, crisp log texture. Very nice. Okay, more natural textures. Notice we're not focused on a whole plant, but just those little elements of the leaves. And in fact, we're not even focusing on a leaf. we're focusing on a small part of the leaf. So think about small part of a leaf or a plant or a rock. Look for those little tiny things that you can photograph. Not a bad idea if you want to Google how to get super close-up photos on your phone. You can do that. I have a little tiny lens that I put on my phone camera. If you have a laser pointer, if you take the little tiny lens out of the laser pointer and clip it to your phone, which is hard to do, you can actually turn it into a little microscope and get really, really small micro landscapes. Maybe I'll take a couple and show you guys. Okay, I love this. This is a little bit of moss, and every once in a while moss will collect dew on it, but moss will get these interesting little shoots of plants that will form flowers on them. This one has happens to get little droplets on it. You're not going to find this very easily in the city. It has to be really humid and moist areas. There is a ton of this kind of moss in the mountains here in Colorado, so if you're on a hike you might see it out there, but you got to be someplace that's a little more moist. If you're over by a lake or something like that, you don't have to stay at home, by the way, to take these photos. If you're like, I'm going to go to a pond or a park, awesome. That's a great place to get these photos. Find little things of moss. We've got that narrow depth of field, blurry, 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 blurry. Focus, focus. And again, more earth tones. This one blows my mind, guys. Blows my mind. Doesn't it look like a lake and a mountain and a sunset? This is a puddle. This is gravel. Look at these rocks. Like if we get real close here, those are just rocks. This is like a footprint or a hole or a tire rut. And then over here is an actual landscape. This is probably the hill, or maybe this is by like a lake. Let's say this is a lake over here. This is water from the lake, and this is the sun. This is a cloud. And just by that lake is a puddle of mud. Maybe a truck drove through and left this big puddle of mud, and they photographed here. This is truly a micro landscape. It looks like a hilly mountain, but it's legitimately just a little puddle in the water. So again, here's the puddle. Oh, that's a different assignment. So we zoom in on this real close. Look at that. It's just little bits of gravel. Okay? This is so cleverly composed. I was shook a little. I was like, whoa, what is that? This is an incredible attempt. I've never taken a photo like this before. I never have, but it's certainly something that sounds very interesting. I've taken lots of micro landscapes of small plants, but I've never made one actually look like a landscape. Notice that horizon line, sky, sun, clouds. This is all a little tiny puddle, just really close to the camera. Good luck, guys. Have fun. Look forward to seeing your photographs.